Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to start by thanking you, Abby and Gundy, for allowing me the opportunity to have this exhibition of my work. I so appreciate this opportunity. I can't remember when I've had more fun, either in the making or in the exhibiting. And the show was tons of fun. So thank you. And thanks for letting me have this opportunity to talk about it too. About 4 years ago, I quit painting, and I have been a painter all my life. And I went from doing 2D to 3D, making little books. I can tell you that shift was a shock to the system when you go from 2D to 3D. And all of a sudden, you're working with constructions as opposed to painting on a surface. But you might wonder why I did this. so I did it partly because I was, I had kind of been doing figurative and portrait work for so many years and kind of reached a plateau with that. I had always used um, some elements of collage in some of the later pieces. And I think I love collage so much because in my work as an academic researcher, I told people's life stories in visual art. And as a mental health professional, getting those life stories was, of course, all about people's memories. And memories and collage have so much in common. They're layered, they're pieced together, they have rough edges and smooth edges, they have images that melt into other images. They can be colorful or they can be monochrome. Uh, they're just so much about telling those stories that always ended up as a collage, and I loved that process. When I say collage, I really am. That word is very elastic. It doesn't have a real specific definition these days. Uh, it includes montage, which is just images, but it also includes a lot of different visual elements all brought together into a single whole. Well, what is memory? It's a lot of visual elements in our psyche that we bring together into a whole. And so very similar experience. Anyway, I retired from academia and quit doing that research, but I was still always looking for some way to put a collage element into my figurative work. So I got this idea of making paintings to look like books, and then having the page on the painting be a collage piece. So this is an example of one of those paintings. So you can see I've painted on a 2D surface something that looks like a book, open to some pages. Okay. Well, that was a lot of fun. I made several of those, and then I thought, what are we doing here? Why don't you just make the book? And I thought, well, I have all these beautiful papers. I've always collected beautiful papers. I just love them. And I've never done anything with them. They're rolled up in a little holder on the walls. And I thought, yeah, why don't you make the books? Well, the problem with that idea is that I had not a single clue about how to go about making books. And so I started off with traditional bookbinding and looking at that and seeing how that was done. And I realized pretty quickly that is not what I want to do. It is very precise. It's very particular. Uh, you need tools, quite a few tools, and gosh, it wasn't where I was wanting to go at that time. Although I admire people that can do that a great deal. Anyway, I decided, okay, we'll go on YouTube, right? See what are people doing, and I started with artist journals, and then I found, just kind of by accident, this entire community of makers uh, doing really what I wanted to do, and that was make um, books to hold memories uh, that were pieced somehow, more collage-like. And there's a couple different names that they call these, and they call them junk journals, which I don't like that name much. And they also call them treasure books, which appeals to me a lot more. And the this whole movement, you'd have to call it an art movement, really grew out of scrapbooking and artist journals and traditional bookmaking and altered bookmaking, which is a thing in itself, altered bookmaking. And the more I got into looking at these different makers and making comments and developing relationships and seeing what they were doing, the more excited I got and the more I began practicing the techniques they were showing with my materials that I actually had on hand. And then I realized, oh no, I need a lot of more materials, because one of the main things is sourcing the materials. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But before I actually got into doing all of that, I kept questioning myself, thinking, well, is this real art? You know, is this just a hobby? You know, with all of that implies. And, you know, I'd spent a lot of years developing a professional art career, and I thought, is this somehow less than? And then I thought, what are you doing? Why are you even asking that question? It doesn't matter. This is what you want to do. And by the way, people, especially women, have been doing this for centuries, taking the bits and pieces of their lives, putting them together, pasting them in books, putting them on flat surfaces, you know, making things out of them. And I thought, I'm just following in a long tradition here, really. And that felt good, you know. And at first I was really particular about, oh, it had to be archival quality and all of this stuff. And then I realized, no, it doesn't. It needs to be good quality. It needs to be high quality. But what I'm really interested in my pieces is for them to feel like something found in an old attic, in an abandoned home or house somewhere. And that is why all of mine really have a vintage feel, no matter what particular style within that I'm using. But anyway, so after I made peace with craft versus hobby versus art, I really got into this. I mean, I really got into it. And there are so many different ways to go about making these journals. There are endless, really limitless possibilities. And there are so many makers out there doing beautiful papers and handmade papers and digital printables and all kinds of embellishments and ephemera. There's a lot of antique stuff available. There's just so much available. So the way I first go about it is I usually decide on a theme, and that is the guiding principle for me. And then from that theme, I begin to source papers and trims and embellishments of all kinds, and ephemera and photos, old vintage photos. I totally love the old vintage photos. So once I get all of that sourced, it's always way more than I need. So I have to curate it, you know, and decide. And what I realized is that really color is one of my organizing principles, because I like a sort of a palette, you know, just like I did as a painter when I put my journals together. So, and then once you kind of get all that together and you have your theme, you've got to think about, well, how do I want to bind this? Because there are so many different ways to bind them. And you really have a two-bind process, because signatures are groups of pages put together bound in a certain way, and each journal has so many signatures, from 1 up to, I think the most I've ever had was 5. I prefer somewhere around 3 or 4. But so you really are binding it 2 different kinds of ways. Well, these makers whose work I've learned from, they're from places as diverse as Austria and Australia. And I get materials from all of these people through a variety of sources, a lot on Etsy, but a lot of different sources. Anyway, once I learned the construction basics and started putting things together, I realized, unlike a lot of makers, I am not interested in a journal that is page after page writing space. There are many people doing that, but I have always been intimidated by those journals. I have bought, I have collected, I have an entire collection of unfilled journals with blank pages, because whenever I would buy one, I would resolve to write in it, and then I would worry about making a mistake or messing it up, or I don't know, it created more anxiety than it did pleasure. So that was not what I wanted for my little books. What I want is people to be excited and pleased and uh, intrigued by the possibilities of a journal. And so that is where I decided I am going to do something different than that. I'm going to make journals that have lots of little spaces where you can capture a moment, a memory, a quote, a word, if you want to, or if you don't want to write in it at all, you don't have to. You can just look at it and play with it, because they are meant to be played with. They are meant to be interactive. And that was one of the real joys of the show, is that Abby and Gundy curated the space so that people could go through the journals, and watching people discover things, it was so exciting for me. I totally loved that part. So I call my little journals moments, because that's all they're intended to capture, is a moment. And I think in that way, there's no reason to be intimidated by lots of space to write in. For this exhibition, I decided I wanted to try showing different bindings. And since each journal takes about a month, I thought, well, I could probably do 12 different bindings. But let me tell you, there are a whole lot more than just 12 bindings. Um, the ones that I chose were things that were either new to me and I had to puzzle it out, or they were ones that I totally loved and I just wanted to make more of, because some bindings are more appealing to me than others. I learned a lot doing this. I learned more about my own aesthetic, how important the vintage look was to me. And to get that vintage look, I have to do some things, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And I also learned that what these journals do is they bring together all my loves. They bring together storytelling and collage and memory, and it just was it's the perfect medium for what I like, what I love to do. Anyway, probably next I will do a whole series on fairy tales, just because Carl Jung says that paraphrasing it, says that fairy tales reveal the deepest aspects of our psyches, and doesn't that just appeal to me as a mental health nurse? So anyway, so once I get all my materials and start sourcing and get it all ready and figured out the binding, actually before I figure out the binding, I have to figure out the size, because some bindings work with some sizes and not others. So size is a big deal to me. I prefer smaller rather than larger. Some people make great big ones. I don't really do that. I do get digital designs. The copyright on them is for this purpose, so anybody can use this as long as the digital files aren't sold. I take those files, I sometimes alter them, a lot of times actually alter them in Photoshop, and then sometimes I make my own digital designs and put in these, so that's how that goes. But everything has to fit within that vintage feel. And to get that vintage feel, I coffee dye almost all my papers, which adds another whole layer. And when I coffee dye them, I use soda to take the acid down or off or out. And boy, the feel, the tactile experience of those papers once they've been, it's just It's really fun. It's luscious. Anyway, I want to show a few of my journals to show you just a few different techniques. So this one here is called Mystery Abounds, Magic Surrounds, and it has a closure that is removable, okay? And it is what's called a never-ending journal because it is an accordion, and you can look at both sides. It has, this journal is bound where the pages can be taken out, and so that way people can, you know, add things to the pages, take out pages, put pages in if they want to. So that is, and it is bound with a pamphlet stitch and has 1, 2, 3, 4 signatures. It's a pretty big one. That's about as big as I ever do. This one is has very different binding. It's called an exposed spine binding, and so you can see the signatures here. Okay, and then they're bound here, and I use the button trim because this is a journal about sewing, and the cover is fabric that I've printed on, and the laces and everything in here are pretty much all antique. So this one is what's called a tall skinny, and it is that exposed binding. Okay. This one here, this is really a different kind of thing. This is a paperback book. Yes, a paperback book. And it's an altered book. And to make an altered paperback book, you have to remove, almost, well, more than half, maybe not quite 2/3 of the actual book. But the name of the paperback book was Fall of Angels. And inside, I have done the pages in a particular kind of binding, um, and each page has some way that you can write on the page. This is so much fun to do, and I know I will be making a lot more of these. They're just, I love the size. You know, the size is great. And then this one is another one with a completely different binding. It's ring bound, and if you remember your ring bound journals from school, it's ring bound. It's steampunk in style. So, you know, we've got from this style to this style, pretty big gap. I mean, you know, pretty big range. Uh, this one is so much fun to do because steampunk images are fun, and there's a lot of them. And it's nice because this one will lay flat, and I have some others that are bound that also lay flat with a different kind of binding. But that nice flat binding means that you can write on it really easily if you want to. And some of them I do these things like put extra writing space if you want that. But everything in here, every single thing has been constructed. Every single piece of paper, every page, everything. And it's just, you can see why it would take a month. Anyway, so that's a few of the different types. And I think that probably covers most of the questions that people asked me on the show night, the opening night. And I did want to mention too that the gallery carries my journals all the time. They keep an inventory all the time. And I also do commissions. Not everything that everybody wants do I want to do as a commission, but because I know kind of what works for me as an artist. But if a person wants a commission, they just have to talk to Abby or Gundy, and we'll hook up and see if it works. But again, I'd just like to thank you all here at Art Gallery. Really, really was an experience of a lifetime. Thank you.